Hello, Super Saver. I hope you're having a good week. So why are global systemically important banks, G-SIBs, among the safest banks in the world? Which countries have G-SIBs and which country has the largest number of G-SIBs? Plus, which banks are they? Those are the questions I'm going to cover in today's video because questions about bank safety from both US and non-US based viewers have flooded our inbox since we posted this recent video on our personal list of the 8 safest US banks to keep your money in. As some of you may recall, here's what I said in that video. What we've learned from the recent bank failures is this. Ultimately, what makes your money and my money safe when it really comes down to the wire, when it really matters, is in one word, government. Or to be more precise, 2 words, government backing. This was true of Silicon Valley Bank when the US government stepped in to insure all deposits, even those above the FDIC standard insurance limit of $250,000 were safe and paid out in full. And this was also true of Credit Suisse when the Swiss government brokered the deal for UBS to buy them instead of letting them go out of business. Even in Switzerland, where things normally run their orderly course without undue haste, the government changed the laws overnight in an emergency procedure to make sure depositors were safe. Although, admittedly, it was not the same outcome for all bond investors, some of which got wiped out. More on that later in this video. Our personal list of the 8 safest US banks here that we spoke about in the previous video, they're all global systemically important banks. G-SIBs, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Basically, they're the US banks. The US government will do everything they can for as long as they can to keep them from going under. The reason being that if one of these banks fails, the entire banking system may be drawn into the next global financial crisis, and along with it, the real economy. And no one really wants that. In this video, we're going to go through the non-US G-SIBs on this official list of global systemically important banks provided by the Financial Stability Board. Before I keep going though, what do you think? Does the US have the largest number of G-SIBs worldwide? Or do more of those G-SIBs sit with another country? Drop your best guess in the comments below without fast forwarding. Anyway, these non-US G-SIBs that we'll be talking about today, for all our non-US based viewers, as well as for US based super savers who have international business interests, friends, or loved ones living abroad, these non-US G-SIBs are, from our point of view, often among the safest banks in their own respective countries. The banks that those governments would try to keep going at nearly all costs to prevent a large-scale market meltdown across the world. Because make no mistake, regardless of whether a G-SIB is US-based or non-US based, the failure of any one of these global systemically important banks would have far-reaching repercussions on the overall financial and banking system in all countries of the world. In this sense, all G-SIBs are too big to fail, as the media is sometimes fond of saying. Here's what makes G-SIBs stand out in terms of safety. 1. G-SIBs are subject to stricter regulation. For example, they're required to have more capital and liquidity on hand than non-G-SIBs. G-SIBs are also subject to higher supervisory expectations, such as how they manage risk, governance, and internal controls. Important during normal times, but even more critical in the current market environment, given the uncertainty around inflation and the pace and direction of where interest rates are moving. 3. A government will generally be more inclined to keep a G-SIB going versus a non-G-SIB if a choice had to be made between the two. Most won't want to say or hear this, but it's the reality of the situation. Assuming limited resources and all else being equal, given the option between saving a global systemically important bank versus saving one that isn't, the winner is quite clear, at least to us, and presumably as well to the international community, which may make their voice heard and apply a bit of subtle pressure to the government of the home country of a G-SIB to not let this institution fail in order to avoid all the global repercussions that such a failure would have. So let's dive in now, Super Saver, and talk about which countries have G-SIBs as well as which country has the most of them. Perhaps this might help put your mind a bit more at ease if you already bank with a G-SIB in your country and can assume that it is among the safest banks in your nation. Or perhaps it'll give you another bank to check out during these uncertain times. Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain, in alphabetical order, each have one G-SIB for a total of 4 G-SIBs across the 4 countries. Canada and Switzerland each have 2 G-SIBs for a total of 4 G-SIBs across the 2 countries. However, we can assume that once the UBS Credit Suisse deal is completed, Switzerland will be moving to this row here with just 1 G-SIB left. Japan and the United Kingdom each have 3 G-SIBs for a total of 6 G-SIBs across both countries. China and France each have 4 G-SIBs for a total of 8 G-SIBs across the 2 countries. And yes, winner, winner, chicken dinner. The US is the country with the most number of G-SIBs, with 8 across the land. So who guessed right? That brings us to a total of 30 G-SIBs across the US, Europe, and Asia. Let's now quickly go through which exactly are the G-SIB banks in each of these countries, because I'm sure you're waiting with anticipation. Let's start with the US in this section so that I can best explain the bucket ranking system for G-SIBs. In a nutshell, the higher the bucket, the more globally relevant a bank is, and the more capital it needs to have on its balance sheet, and therefore, the more capital it has to weather whatever financial storm we may be heading towards. JP Morgan Chase tops the list in bucket 4, meaning it should be the most able to digest and manage financial losses and external shocks. Bucket 4 needs to hold an extra 2.5% of capital above and beyond what other non-G-SIBs are required to hold. And JP Morgan Chase is the only bank across the globe that is in bucket 4 of G-SIBs. Bank of America and Citigroup, again ordered alphabetically, are in bucket 3 with an extra 2% of capital. Goldman Sachs is in bucket 2 with an extra 1.5% of capital. Bank of New York Mellon, Morgan Stanley, State Street, and Wells Fargo are in bucket 1 with an extra 1% of capital. For those of you who want to dive deeper into these bucket calculations, I've included the Financial Stability Board's link to this 2022 list of global systemically important banks in the description below. Here are the 4 global systemically important banks in each China and France, again in alphabetical order. This column shows the country, this column the name of the bank within the country, this column shows each bank's G-SIB bucket ranking, and this column shows the additional capital requirements for each bank. These are the 4 G-SIBs in China, and these are the 4 G-SIBs in France. Here are the 3 global systemically important banks, each in Japan and the United Kingdom. And here are the 2 global systemically important banks, each in Canada and Switzerland as of this taping. As I mentioned earlier, we can assume at this point that once the UBS Credit Suisse deal is completed, there will only be 1 G-SIB in Switzerland. But it's not done before it's done, right? And last but not least, here are the global systemically important banks in Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. Each of these countries has 1 G-SIB. Now, there are 5 things to keep in mind with these US and non-US G-SIBs. And the first is that we're looking at safety from the perspective of a private or retail depositor, someone like you and me, who's putting our money into that bank for safekeeping, not necessarily from the perspective of an investor. Second, not all of the G-SIBs will necessarily be open for private and retail depositors. Let's take as examples US G-SIBs, State Street, and Bank of New York Mellon, also known as BONY. Neither of them have significant direct business with private and retail investors. However, indirectly, as the custodian for many banks and brokerages and many of the funds they sell, State Street and BONY both play a very important role for private and retail investors, often without us even realizing it. The third thing to note is this. Just as everyone's financial journey is different, as we say here, Diamond Nest Egg, every country's legal and regulatory framework is different. And while G-SIBs will generally be among the safest banks in any given country, for all the reasons we've already outlined, there may be other local banks in some countries that may be as safe as G-SIBs or even directly guaranteed by the government. For example, Kantonalbanken in Switzerland or Sparkassen in Germany. The fourth thing to be aware of is that this list of G-SIBs is updated on an annual basis. The 30 G-SIBs on this 2022 list of global systemically important banks, they are unchanged from the 2021 list. A new list of G-SIBs will next be published in November of this year. Fifth, this video is not sponsored by any of the financial institutions mentioned in it, nor do we receive any compensation if you choose to do business with any of them. As customary, this video is based on our analysis and our perspective of what's happened so far and does not guarantee any future outcomes. So, moving on. If you're banking with a non-G-SIB in your country, and at some point you find yourself getting nervous this year about where you're keeping your money as you watch things unfold with inflation, interest rates, and the financial markets, if that happens, then come back to this list and see whether one of these G-SIBs might be a better fit for your financial circumstances. If, on the other hand, you're content with your financial institution, then this list of G-SIBs around the globe is simply smart trivia you can share with friends and family when you run out of conversation topics. Either way, this video will hopefully have helped give you some peace of mind during these turbulent times. And if you're interested in learning more about where we've moved our money recently, then check out this video here that I mentioned earlier. All right, Super Saver, as always, if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to share with those you care about. And of course, hit that thumbs up and see you again very soon with another brand new wealth building video.